Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Parliament isn't sitting today, suspended for 5 weeks after Boris Johnson's second attempt to call a snap general election late last night was blocked by MPs. Parliament was prorogued, to use the official term, just before 2 o'clock this morning amid chaotic scenes. Opposition MPs held protests, accusing the Prime Minister of silencing democracy. Mr Johnson has chaired a meeting of the Cabinet today to discuss his options. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, reports.
The call made, as it always has been. Black suits and lace worn in the usual way.
Desire the presence of this honourable House.
But then there's been nothing, genuinely nothing, ever quite like this. Opposition MPs' fury that the Prime Minister's closed Parliament early. Shouting no, brandishing placards, even scuffling to try to keep the Speaker in his chair. A symbol of their desire to keep Parliament open in these vital weeks.
This is not, however, a normal prorogation. It is not typical, it is not standard, and it represents an act of executive fiat. And therefore, an act of executive fiat.
Shame on you, opposition MPs shout at Conservatives. The Commons is not so much divided, it's broken into jagged bits. Then after those moments of pandemonium at nearly 1:30 in the morning, song broke out on the green benches. We'll keep the red flag flying here. The socialist anthem, the red flag. Scots were hey, then not to be outdone, a Welsh chorus. Just what were MPs protesting in Parliament trying to prove?
This was the shutdown of our democracy.
Parliament descended into chaos. Don't you worry about the impression that gives to the public?
But with the greatest respect, Parliament did not descend into chaos. There was a very rowdy debate that went on beforehand, very passionate views being expressed on all sides. We have a government here that is treating our democracy with contempt.
I did almost nothing except Latin and Greek for about 20 years. And now I'm running the country.
Well, not exactly. Boris Johnson might be in charge in theory and spent the day talking about his plans for schools. But even if he's trying to pretend it is happening, the Commons did not give him the election he wants.
Who can give us some information about William, Duke of Normandy? Oh, yeah.
Well, he conquered England.
Yes, but what was his? Why did he think that how did he have a claim to the throne of England? Why did he think he should be going? Do you want someone to help you?
He's lost control of Parliament, and he cannot brush that off.
And anybody who says it's all this stuff about it being anti-democratic, I mean, donnez-moi un break. What a load of nonsense. We were very, very clear that if people wanted a democratic moment, if they wanted an election, we offered it to the Labour opposition, and mysteriously they decided not to go for it.
Parliament almost felt in shock this morning about what happened in the early hours. The idea that both sides could have respect for the other, almost stripped away. The doors are closed now, though, MPs away for weeks with an uncertain return. The Prime Minister determined to stick to his Brexit deadline of Halloween, whatever convention he has to flout. But opponents raged against him who will push the boundaries right back. That squeezes the Prime Minister's options, leaving more risky controversy or pull off a miracle and find a deal.
From the DUP, the Tories' Northern Irish allies, to cabinet ministers, there is a whiff of hope about the prospects of a deal with the EU. Yet for the Prime Minister's advisor, Dominic Cummings, who revels in controversy, and number 10, it's Boris Johnson's Brexit, and soon, or it might be bust.
Will Britain leave the EU on time?
Sure.
Laura Kuensberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So what happens now following last night's suspension of Parliament? Well, over the next few weeks, MPs and activists will be attending the party conferences. MPs will return for the Queen's speech on October the 14th, when the government lays out its key plans. An EU summit will be held on the 17th of October. And 2 weeks later, on October the 31st, the UK is due to leave the EU. So what options does the Prime Minister have? Well, if he can get a new deal with the EU, which is passed by MPs, then the UK could still leave by October the 31st. If not, and if MPs still won't support leaving without a deal, the Prime Minister is now legally obliged to ask for an extension. He said he'd rather be dead in a ditch. So Boris Johnson could ignore or test the law, but it would be highly controversial and he could end up in court. He could call for another election. This tactic has failed twice already, but some speculate he might try to trigger one by calling for a vote of confidence in his own government. Or he could just resign, and in doing so, force whoever replaces him to ask the EU for an extension.
But earlier this morning, Parliament closed for 5 weeks in scenes of chaos and fury. During the formal ceremony, angry opposition MPs sang in the chamber in protest and claimed the government was silencing their voices. Equally bitter on their side, Conservative MPs heckled the Speaker, who they consider to be biased against them. Boris Johnson insists that the best way of resolving the Brexit divisions is to hold a general election. But would that provide a clear solution? Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has been taking a look.
In Westminster Abbey, faces from a bygone political age, remembering former Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown. The Speaker attended too. The calm solemnity here, a world away from scenes early this morning in the House of Commons. Labour MPs protesting around the Speaker's chair. They've been asked to attend the ceremony in the Lords that marks the 5-week suspension of Parliament by the government. The Speaker said he agreed with those protesting.
I will play my part. This is not, however, a normal prorogation. It is not typical. It is not standard. It's one of the longest for decades, and it represents, not just in the minds of many colleagues, but huge numbers of people outside, an act of executive fiat.
The Speaker went to the Lord's ceremony heckled by Tory MPs.
Do your job, of which you're handsomely paid.
The Prime Minister had got his prorogation of Parliament.
We do, in Her Majesty's name and in obedience to Her Majesty's commands, prorogue this Parliament to Monday, the 14th day of October.
SNP MPs stayed back in the Commons, singing songs to celebrate their victory, pushing back an election to late November at the earliest. Some Labour MPs sang the red flag.
We'll keep the red flag flying here.
Hardly any Tories hung around to welcome the Speaker back. Our divided politics on stark display.
This stuff about it being anti-democratic, I mean, donnez-moi un break. What a load of nonsense. We were very, very clear that if people wanted a democratic moment, if they wanted an election, we offered it to the Labour opposition, and mysteriously they decided not to go for it.
The Prime Minister went ahead with election campaigning, promoting schools policies, even though he hasn't got the election he'd hoped would have started already.
And who can give us some information about William, Duke of Normandy? Oh, yeah.
Well, he conquered England.
Yes, but what was his? Why did he think that how did he have a claim to the throne of England?
When Harold was sailing to Normandy,
do you remember? What did he swear? We'll just move on. What did he
swore
say?
an oath of loyalty to help William, Duke of Normandy, claim the throne of England.
Exactly. Well done.
And then he ratted on the.
But what would the voters have answered if this was full-scale general election campaigning right now? The company Focal Data polled 19,000 voters and piled in extra data and constituency profiles to predict what would happen in an election result today, seat by seat. Compared to the share of the vote in the last general election, this poll suggests the Tories and Labour are both down more than 10 points, the Lib Dems doubling their standing and the Brexit Party doing much better than UKIP managed. What does this mean in terms of seats? Adding in Scotland, this was the last general election result, and the Focal Data analysis suggests a vote right now would produce another hung parliament, with Labour down on seats and the Tories making no real advance.
At the heart of the whole Tory election strategy is to make inroads into Labour areas in the Midlands, seats like Ashfield in the north. Your analysis suggests the Tories are doing that, but not enough to negate the fact that they're losing seats in Scotland, Aberdeen, for instance, to the SNP, and to the Lib Dems down here in England, places like Lewis.
Yes, I mean, the Tory strategy relies on sort of realigning their base away from traditional heartlands up to traditional Labour heartlands that supported Leave. This is a bold strategy, and it's, to be honest, probably the only winning strategy they have. But they're not currently taking enough voters with them. But it's very, very close.
But right now, the Tories are more or less, when you net out the gains and the losses, they're just standing still.
Currently, they are standing still. But in the case of a campaign, it's so finely balanced that the campaigns are really going to make a difference.
Some Tories think the Conservatives must start their campaign with a full-blown pact with the Brexit Party, something Number 10 is holding back from.
The only way they're going to vote and support us, those voters are going to support us if we haven't done Brexit, frankly, is if the Brexit Party says you should vote for your Conservative candidate in this seat. I don't see any other way. I'm still waiting for someone else to explain to me how it will work. I just don't see us squeezing their vote down without actually doing the deed.
In your analysis, Labour are picking up some pro-Leave seats, sort of coming through the middle, because the Brexit Party is hurting the Tories, places like Thurrock on the Middlesbrough seats. But they're losing some of the pro-Remain seats they got last time, Kensington, to take an example, Warwick and Leamington. They're rolling backwards.
Labour aren't doing well at all, and I would agree with you. They are rolling backwards at the moment, and they're unable to hold on to a large portion of voters they took up in 2017, and it looks like the Lib Dems coming back are taking a lot of Remain supporting voters. Labour are going to have to do something, you know, I think a bit more drastic than they've been doing at the moment if they are going to, you know, they want to be the biggest party, they want to have a majority. They are absolutely miles away from doing that at the moment.
No, it doesn't really shock me from being out there in the public. I think that I have long felt that there is a risk that we have a general election for essentially the numbers not to change dramatically enough to benefit anybody.
The Prime Minister's aide, Dominic Cummings, has told allies he believes the Tories can squeeze back the Brexit Party vote. Our analysis suggests if they got them down to 7%, the Tories might get a 100 majority. If pro-Remain tactical voters swung behind Labour or the Lib Dems, depending on where they stood a chance of winning, that could give Labour a thumping majority. The DUP have just been in to see the Prime Minister. Some of them are privately worried. Number 10, boxed in by opposition manoeuvres and by the law, could be exploring a Brexit deal that leaves Northern Ireland alone following EU rules, not the rest of the UK. The EU's incoming Trade Commissioner tonight said he thought there were signs of movement on both sides over Brexit. There are doubts in Brussels whether this Parliament or the next one will sign off on a deal.
Gary Gibbon reporting with me now to discuss that polling is senior Conservative MP and former Chief Whip Andrew Mitchell. Andrew Mitchell, it doesn't seem to suggest that it will be any different from the situation now. In other words, a hung Parliament.
Well, good evening. I think that this will be an election when finally the Labour Party agree to it, which it's absolutely impossible to read at the moment. But if Boris Johnson sticks to his guns, if we leave by October the 31st, I hope with a deal following the European summit, then I think the prospects for the Conservative Party, particularly armed with a good One Nation Queen speech, are very good.
Well, the strategy seems to be to concentrate on those Leave voting seats in the Midlands and Scotland and in northern England.
Yes, I rather agree with what Dominic Cummings said to the journalists outside his house. I mean, I think there's a very, very different feeling outside of the M25 beltway, outside of metropolitan London, where people who voted Leave feel they've been cheated. And there's been 3 years of argy-bargy. They want to leave. So I do think you get a rather different view. I find it in the West Midlands particularly as well, where there are some seats which the Labour Party hold at the moment, which I very much think we are quite well placed to gain.
Well, our poll sort of suggests that that might be true, but the biggest thing is that if you're really going to get a majority, you would have to have a pact with the Brexit Party, and that, to people like you, is an anathema.
But I don't think that's true, John. I think that if we have left by October the 31st, then what is the point of the Brexit Party? And also, you know, we've got a Prime Minister who led the campaign to leave, who is emphatic about leaving. It doesn't seem to me there's an awful lot of relevant political space there for the Brexit Party.
But nevertheless, this poll suggests, and there are others too that confirm it, that he's got a heck of a job to turn it round.
The key issue is whether or not we are able to leave by the 31st of October. That is going
Well, you don't believe that we will, do you? Let's be candid. I mean, you're a realist.
No, I do believe. I think it's very important that we do honour our promise and leave by the 31st. But I am very keen indeed that the summit should deliver a deal. And after all, this is the first time in your and my political life where politics is not defined by left, right, Labour, Tory principally. It is now by Remain, Leave. Those are very deep definitions in Britain at the moment, which has split our country right down the middle. You've got 2 Remain parties, 2 Leave parties. But if we leave on the 31st, which I profoundly hope we will, and as I say,
with a
deal, then it seems to me that the Brexit Party's fox has been shot.
That's Mrs May Mark IV. I mean, we just get another defeat.
No, I think that the deal that Boris Johnson is clearly straining every sinew to achieve is one which will be better than the deal that was so heavily defeated in the House of Commons.
Wouldn't his strained sinew be better exercise actually in Europe, going around trying to get a deal?
I think there's an awful lot more going on behind the scenes than is generally recognised. And in EU negotiations, you have this business of texts that are draft and are not therefore tabled. I think there is a plan. That's what Boris has said, and I very much hope he will be successful.
And you now think still that a general election is the answer to all your woes?
I think that our legitimacy in the House of Commons is coming to an end. We need an election to clear the democratic air. We need a fresh mandate, and the country needs to decide who's best to govern now.
Andrew Mitchell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Police in Northern Ireland have said that a bomb found in Londonderry was intended for use against a police patrol. They found the device while looking for bomb-making equipment in the Cregan Heights area of the city. Officers were attacked with missiles and petrol bombs as they carried out the searches last night. Andy Davis is there for us. Andy.
John, high on the hillside behind me lies Cregan, a large estate, long a Republican heartland, where earlier this year the journalist Lyra McKee was killed. Last night it was the scene of yet more attacks on the police. Around 40 petrol bombs were thrown, say the PSNI. A couple of people were suffering burn injuries, but no one else was injured. And all of this had occurred during a search operation in which the police found an explosive device. Really dangerous device, one senior officer told me this afternoon, intended to be operated by a command wire and designed specifically, they think, to murder police officers. The work of the new IRA, they claim, who were behind a mortar bomb last weekend discovered in Strabane, and they think that a variety of lethal devices are being trialled by the group at the moment.
My assessment is the likelihood is that device was there to be used at some point against a police patrol in Cregan. We believe that the new IRA were behind this. We believe that the new IRA want to drive policing out of Cregan.
And Andy, the fear tonight is that these incidents are very much on the increase.
Yes, remember, these so-called dissidents are still wedded to the idea of achieving a united Ireland through violent means, but they are considered very small in number with limited capabilities. Having said that, the police talk about a rise in tempo of their activity. And this comes, of course, amidst so many warnings about these being the very sort of people who would readily exploit any fragilities surrounding Brexit. I was in Dublin earlier this morning interviewing the former Irish Prime Minister, Bertie Ahern, a key architect of the Northern Ireland peace process, and he had this to say about the overnight developments.
Last night there was petrol bombs in Derry. There was a bomb found in Strabane on Sunday night. There were other difficulties along the border last week. You know, you would need to have your eyes totally closed and ears closed not to see that there is a build-up of dissident activity. And that is a dangerous position. But we have to be careful, and the negotiators have to be careful.
Those negotiating Brexit, he went on to say, have to be very careful indeed about finding a way through all of this while protecting this still evolving peace process. Back to you in London.
Thanks, Andy.
The Irish Republican terrorism of the last few months in Northern Ireland isn't on the scale of the Troubles or anything like it, of course, but it is very worrying for police chiefs who say there are now concerted efforts to kill their officers. A bomb found in a vehicle in Londonderry yesterday was, they believe, to be used to attack a police patrol.
The presence of armoured police vehicles on the Cregan estate sparked violence last night. This after a search of the area had uncovered an improvised explosive device, a roadside bomb which the police say was intended for use against one of their patrols.
We believe that the new IRA were behind this. We believe that the new IRA want to drive policing out of Cregan. There is a concerted effort at the minute to murder your police officers in your communities to stop them assisting you.
Police say there have now been 8 attempted attacks on their personnel so far this year. In June, a bomb was found under the car of a serving police officer at an East Belfast golf course. Last month in Fermanagh, a bomb disposal team were called to deal with a device, and another bomb exploded nearby. And a few days ago, a mortar bomb was discovered, aimed at a police station in Strabane.
There's nothing fundamentally new about the group which has become known as the new IRA. It runs along all the old lines of militant Irish republicanism. But in the continued absence of devolved government here, and with a hard Brexit looming, what it might have are new opportunities.
The roadside bomb in Cregan was found very close to where the journalist Lyra McKee was shot dead during rioting here in April. And there's real concern on the estate about the extent to which young people, teenagers, are being drawn into dissident-inspired violence.
I would appeal to parents, if you know there's a bomb in the estate, ask where your child is, your son. I wouldn't want if I had a child or son out in the middle of a situation like that. Bring them home.
Politicians on all sides have condemned the violence, including those Republicans who signed up to the political process, which has now broken down.
It's a small minority of young people, but one rioting is one too many, and the residents, as much as they had enough disruption going on, they did not need that also.
Isn't the problem that your branch of republicanism isn't as popular here as it once was? You're not as influential as you once were.
I would disagree with that. I don't see the link at all. I don't see the link with republicanism and what happened here in the streets last night.
There may be only a very small amount of support for the new IRA, but they are showing themselves to be a growing threat to an ever more fragile peace. Geraint Vincent, News at 10, Londonderry.
Well, having shut down Parliament in a spectacularly chaotic late-night session, the Prime Minister went back to school today. Coincidentally, or possibly not, the lessons of history were the subject at Pimlico Primary School near Westminster. As you saw, he put out his hand politely and answered correctly. At last, something is going right. How history will judge Mr Johnson will, of course, depend on whether he gets a Brexit deal. One plan said to be under consideration is a Northern Ireland-only backstop, effectively separating the province off from the rest of the UK. That seems to be going down well with his allies in the Democratic Unionist Party.
At times over the past few years, Parliament has felt like a zoo. In the early hours of this morning, it acted like one. Opposition MPs trying to physically stop the Speaker leaving his chair to prevent Parliament being suspended. To cries of "shame on you," Tory MPs filed out. Labour voiced their fury, but the government has its way. For the next 5 weeks, Parliament has been closed down.
What piece of evidence?
Which meant the Prime Minister could go back to school.
Who can give us some information about William, Duke of Normandy? Oh, yeah.
Well, he conquered England.
He couldn't wait to answer here, but not so keen to explain what he's doing about getting a deal.
We're working very hard to get a deal. I think we will get a deal, but if absolutely necessary, we will come out with no deal. But in the meantime, we're going to get on with the priorities, I think, of the British people.
With the Prime Minister insisting he'll never ask for an extension, what possible routes are there to a deal? The thorniest issue is how to keep the border open between Northern Ireland and the Republic. The government is already discussing the possibility of a single zone for food and animals across the island of Ireland. But that doesn't mean all checks can be avoided on the border, so it's unlikely to be enough. A Northern Ireland-only backstop has been mooted as a way out. That would keep Northern Ireland in the same customs arrangement as the Republic of Ireland and the rest of the EU. But it would mean a border in the Irish Sea. The reddest of red lines for the DUP, who prop up the government. They rushed to Downing Street for talks, insisting afterwards that the Prime Minister had confirmed it would not happen. Labour, meanwhile, having refused the chance of an early election, are adamant they can't wait for one.
A general election is coming. But we won't allow Johnson to dictate the terms. And I can tell you this, we're ready for that election. We're ready to unleash the biggest people-powered campaign we've ever seen in this country and in this movement.
The DUP clearly feel that they have assurances from Boris Johnson that he's not going to let them down. But the Prime Minister has to resurrect some form of deal very close to what's already been offered if he's not going to delay Brexit. And that's going to involve disappointing someone. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
Well, while the government here wrestles with the next step on Brexit, over in Brussels there is something of a changing of the guard going on at the top of the European Union. The new head of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, apparently isn't assuming Brexit will actually happen. She's not alone there. But in the event it finally does, the new Trade Commissioner in charge of future trade deals, including across the Irish border, is, you guessed it, from the Irish Republic. Somebody over there has a sense of humour.
The new president of the Commission announces her new team, a team that for the first time in 46 years will not include a British commissioner at the top table.
This is the team that will shape the European way.
But as if to remind London that Brussels will still have a profound influence on the UK economy, Ursula von der Leyen has given Ireland's commissioner, Phil Hogan, the crucial job of overseeing future trade talks with Britain.
Is your decision to appoint the Irish Commissioner to the trade portfolio a message to the United Kingdom of what to expect were they to be trying to negotiate a free trade agreement after a no-deal Brexit?
I know Phil Hogan as an excellent, very fair negotiator. And this is what I expect of him as a trade commissioner. He will be fair, but determined. The Brexit, should it happen, is not the end of something, but it's the beginning of our future relationship.
Should Brexit happen, she said, all outcomes are clearly still on the cards in the minds of Brussels. Phil Hogan may prove a controversial choice. On the left here, showing Michel Barnier the Irish border, he's called Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg the Three Stooges.
But he's already described Boris Johnson as an unelected gambler. I mean, it doesn't augur well, does it?
Well, it's tough language. I know Phil Hogan a long time and I know his style and it doesn't change. He speaks quite directly, but to some extent so does the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So perhaps in a way they're well balanced.
The absence of a UK commissioner doesn't seem to bother anyone at this stage. The new team don't take over until the 1st of November, by which time, in theory, Britain will have left. But if there's to be another extension, well, Mrs von der Leyen said she would then expect London to appoint someone new. Another potential complication for those talks at the end of October. James Mace, News at 10, Brussels.
And Robert is, of course, here to talk about all this. Look, if he doesn't, by some miracle, produce a new deal, and he therefore appears to have two choices. He can either obey the law and ask for an extension, or he can resign. Does he have another grand plan?
So the key date is the 19th of October, when the new law says he has to sign a letter requesting a Brexit delay. I understand that the Prime Minister reiterated to Cabinet today that he has absolutely no intention of requesting a Brexit delay at the preceding EU Council on the 17th and 18th of October. But he said that what he would do on the 19th of October, which is when the law says he has to request a date, would, in his words, become clearer very near the time. So he's not going to show his hand before then. But then there is this other extraordinary thing that comes from a number 10 source, which is, you know, they are emphasising they intend to sabotage extension. Right now, when as a British Prime Minister ever admitted to engaging in sabotage of any sort. An extraordinary choice of words. Now, my own view is that there is literally no chance of him requesting an extension. And I've spoken to senior lawyers about this, including some who've worked in the past for the government, and they say there's just no precedent sort of showing what indeed a Prime Minister would have to do. I know, some former Prime Ministers have said that he would have to resign if he breaks the law. Well, actually, senior lawyers say that's not necessarily the case. He might just cling on and say, impeach me.
It's not often I'm left speechless, but let's move on to Labour. There's some news on their position.
Yes, which is actually, I would say, very important in this whole Brexit debate, because the trade unions, in a very important meeting with the leader of the opposition, have endorsed a pretty ambiguous position on Brexit for the Labour Party to take into the next election. They will campaign for a referendum, but they will say that there will be a so-called credible leave option on the ballot paper and a remain option on the ballot paper. But this is the really important bit. Labour will not have an official position in the general election on whether to be in favour of remain or leaving. Now, the reason that matters is that very senior members of the Labour Party, like John McDonnell, Keir Starmer, Tom Watson, fear that unless Labour campaigns for Remain, a lot of Labour supporters will go to parties like the Liberal Democrats, who are avowedly in favour of Remain, and they fear that their result will their support will suffer significantly as a result. Just to be absolutely clear, the final decision on this is made at Labour conference, but with the unions behind Corbyn, I don't see how Corbyn can be pushed off this position.
All right, Robert, thank you very much indeed.